This is a special car. It's a 1925 Springfield Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. Started out in Hollywood with a famous actor, and it's found a happy home here in Manhattan. I'd love to tell you about it. First thing that we want to talk about is the fact that when you bought a Rolls-Royce, basically you bought the chassis. When you look at one of these cars, you'll find that the body is just kind of bolted on the chassis, and there's a reason for that. But you can see the exposed bolts. This is actually where the tools go. You can see the spring with its leather covers to protect it from grit and grime. But then the body is just bolted on, and that's because in the day you had a choice of 32 different body styles. Could be a two-seat roadster, could be a sedan. Most of them were some kind of a formal style. This one is a particularly unusual car called a Salamanca Collapsible, and I'll explain that a little later. But right now, we want to just look at the size. It's a 12-foot wheelbase, 33-inch tires, just the presence that the car has. When you see a Rolls-Royce in your rearview mirror, or when you're approaching the car, there are several aspects that are unique to the Rolls-Royce. The first is the famous radiator and grille, patterned after the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. It's still the same general proportions even on the new cars today. These were handmade, hand soldered out of what you call German silver. And below this, then you have the shutters and you're sort of your own thermostat, because I'll show you later inside you have a control to raise and lower those to moderate the temperature. And then when people see this car, the first thing they do with the camera is take a picture of the hood ornament, properly called the Spirit of Excellency, but more likely called the Flying Lady. When Rolls-Royce started in 04, 5, 6, 7, they didn't have a standard hood ornament. They just had a radiator cap. So they commissioned a sculptor named Charles Sykes, and he devised this particular style. And it's sort of like a lady landing on the hood as you drive along. It was first introduced on February 6, 1911. The headlights are something special. There's different shapes, but this one they call the drum style. And once again, German silver. Did you notice there's sort of a lavender cast to the lenses? That's of the elements that were in the glass when it was made, and over time exposure to sun causes them to get this kind of unusual shade, which I think is very attractive. Down low here you see there's a crank. This car does have an electric starter, but in those days the batteries weren't the best ever, and so there may be a time that you needed to start it, as they say, on the handle, so it was available. And then the front part of the frame, which they have a kind of a crazy name called the dumb irons, there's a bracket here that bolts on for your bumper. Strangely enough, bumpers were optional. So, and there was one apocryphal saying that Henry Royce said bumpers were an excuse for poor driving. Anyway, you could have those bolted on. These have actually kind of a spring feature to them. We're going to open the bonnet, as they say, or we say the hood. The hood ornaments turn sideways so the wings don't ding the paint, and Doug is holding this little buffer towel on. The rivets here are hand painted, and it can chip the paint off, so we're going to be careful about it. You really won't be able to see, but there's little spring-loaded locks down here on the hood. There's also an actual lock with a key, and that goes back to the sort of apocryphal saying that the engines are sealed for life, but they're not. But it's just a nice feature. So this is a fabulous engine in a lot of ways. Fabulous for construction, for durability, and for appearance, and for function. This was the big thing that Henry Royce did. He wasn't averse to copying from other people, but this engine, the design and so forth, is pretty much his. All the things that you need are right out here in the open. So here's your carburetor, and you can adjust it. This is the jet for the idle speed, and this is the high speed running. You can loosen the little pinch bolt, and you can do the fine adjusting on that. Then this is the float chamber for the carburetor, and this is the throttle here. And then just below here on the chassis, the lubricant on these is more sort of heavyweight oil than grease that you squeeze out of a grease gun. So to avoid crawling down under the car, there is a fitting here, 3 different places of the running gear, and you have a big syringe, and you screw it in there and give it a pump occasionally, and that lubricates your running gear. Over here is the water pump. Twin distributors, that's another way that these cars were reliable. You could, if one failed, you could run it on the other one. You can run them together or separately. And then this little bitty barrel down here is a piston that runs back and forth and pressurizes the fuel tank. The fuel is delivered by air pressure. One other interesting point, you can see the fan belt. It's got links, and the reason it does, a fan belt over time will stretch, and so to get it the right tension, there is this rod here and this bolt. You loosen that and you push it down to raise it up or lower it down to get the right amount of tension on it. Part of the success and longevity of these cars is the cooling system, and it's really over-designed. It has a great radiator, a big fan, and the water travels through the heads. It goes through this tube here down into the engine, and then goes around the cylinders, travels out of here, and again, all that's easy accessible. Separating the engine from the driver's compartment is the firewall, and it has some interesting features. The most significant is this brass chassis plate, and it has a serial number called S128MK. S is for Springfield, and then it's just a numbering system, 128MK. Then there would be 129MK, 130MK, etc. This is where the fuses live, and then this is a very squeaky horn, a klaxon horn, and there's even a little spot back here where you can lubricate it. And then also fixed to the firewall are brackets where the motion for the various functions on the carburetor and other parts are attached. One of the fun things about this car, there's some idiosyncrasies, and one is the simple thing of shutting the hood. It fits very well, and the reason it does is because there's 3 little springs on there. And so what you do, when you raise it up, you take it down, you position this over this, we'll call it an angle iron, make sure the springs are engaged, and then thunk, it just shuts beautifully, and your little spring-loaded clips, and there you are. Time to get behind the wheel. The doors are hinged at the rear, which helps on the entrance. It's pretty tight, but if you can slide in, and then the door should shut with a click. It does. Starting the car involves quite a bit of ceremony. The first thing you do is you pump up the fuel pressure. If you're listening to the part about the engine, it runs by air pressure, but this pump over here, and you see the little needle popping here, that means we're building pressure in the fuel tank. Well, now we have the fuel pressure pumped up, so we're basically ready to go. Let's turn the ignition on. It's a double ignition, so you go past 1, past 2 to double. Now we're ready to work on the quadrant up here, and this we control manually what a computer does today. Their ignition timing, so we'll put it down so it's retarded, and then we want a strong mixture, so we move it over here to strong, and then we want to open the throttle a little bit, so we do like so. The button to start it. There's nothing on the dashboard, but it's a button up on the firewall that you touch with your toe, and off it goes. We have the engine going now. It's time to take off. So this is a simple 3-speed gear pattern, just like a Model A, like a 37 Ford. So you push down on the clutch and put it down into first. And one thing nice about these cars, the clutch is very smooth engaging. You just let it off you go. Up into second, and then over here down into third. So once we're going, if we want ventilation, we turn this thing. It's got a lot of fine threads. That brings your air in over the cowl. And then you just watch your gauges, your temperature gauge, your amp gauge, oil pressure, fuel pressure. You have a clock, and really that's about all you need for great motoring. The driver's compartment, you can see, is very simple and very plain. It has good cowhide leather and just a simple floor mat. That's because it's durable and you may be in the rain or the snow. But in that case, there is sort of a complicated set of pieces to put all this together. Up here on the top of the windshield header, there's a little slot, and there are arms that go back and hook in here, this part of the body. And then there are rods that you attach, and you slip side curtains over it that have sort of windows in it. And it pretty well covers you in. Probably can't see very well, but you'll be a little more warm and a little more dry. So now we're home. We shut it off, and we put the emergency brake on. And then something peculiar about a Silver Ghost is this stick. This stick you put on the clutch so it keeps it pushed down part way, because one of the beauties of driving this car is the clutch is incredibly smooth. The reason it's smooth, because it runs in oil. And if you don't put this on, then over time the compression of the spring squeezes the oil from the clutch lining, and it jerks and it makes a noise that's embarrassing. So now the last thing I do, I reach down here, I push the clutch down, and I stick the stick in. Now it's time to go have a glass of wine. I said this car was a Salamanca collapsible, and now it gets really interesting, the way this body is built. So, if in fair weather, you can roll the window down, you can also roll the division window down. If that's not enough, this car is actually a convertible. So what you do, first, these little thumb screws here, you take those all the way out, and if you notice, this is a hinge. Okay, so this part folds down, you open the door, and here's your other part of the hinge, and this made so the window frame itself folds down, and this knob here goes in that slot. Now you have the window frames down. The next thing is to release the top. And in here is a clip that you release. And then follow over here. Here's this nut. Take your tool, you release that. Push the top up a little bit, and this arm folds right down here against the division partition. And then you're ready, with help, to release the tension on this, what we call a Landau bar. And then this massive top folds back, and you've got a fully open car. It was the most expensive body you could have on a Rolls-Royce at the time. It cost about $16,000, which may not seem like much today, but that's the equivalent of about 30 Model Ts or about 7 nice homes. That puts it in perspective. One of the features of this, the big window that's held up by a spring, it could rattle. So these little wedges that are held on by these delicate cords are here, and you put those in and it helps stabilize the window. Traditionally, the rear compartment on these formal cars was very formal. You might even call it austere. The material is the finest wool, so it's warm in the winter and you don't perspire on it in the summer. So there's nice space for two people. This is configured traditionally for a man and a woman. The woman sits on the right side. The reason that this is all configured so that the lady sits on that side is when you pull up to the curb, the lady gets out on the curb. This particular car is left-hand drive, made for the U.S. market in Springfield, Massachusetts. But if it were a right-hand drive car made in England, the roles and the sides would be reversed. And you see there is a little place we call the vanity that has a clock, and there's also in there a makeup mirror and a notebook. There's also a switch there for the lights in the interior, and most importantly, there is the microphone to speak to the driver. When the driver is driving and gets these instructions, he needs to be alert and listen, and this particular car has the horn right between the driver, or if you have a footman there, and you can actually swivel it one side to the other. On this side is where the gentleman sits, and was the fashion of the day. You were a smoker, you either had your cigar or you had your Tiffany's silver cigarette case, and so you have the convenience of the cigarette lighter on the cord, and then two ashtrays. Maybe one is for matches and the other is for ashes. So you have the spacious part for the two people on the back. If you're by yourself, there's a footrest that comes forward, or in this case it's tucked back out of the way so additional passengers can hop on board. This one has a small squab for one passenger, and then fairly unique to this style of car, it actually has a side-facing seat with an armrest. Okay, we're now at the rear of the car. Several interesting features here. One is the fuel tank, and it is a tank that's suspended in the frame, and this is your filler for it. Here we have the drum-style tail lights that match the headlights, the cowl lights. That's kind of unusual for what we're used to today. This has a traditional red stop light, but the next side is blue, and you turn that on to signify who knows what that you were running. But they didn't have backup lights, so they had the blue. Some had one light, some had two. This happens to have two in your license plate for your California plate where the car was new. This is when a trunk was a trunk. They were all-purpose. Quite a few actually had fitted luggage inside so that you could pack the way you just wanted and then lift the lid up. A lot of times people kept tools, covers, who knows what was in there. But this is when a trunk was a trunk. Today we're spoiled with the longevity and durability of our tires. We just ignore them mostly. It was very critical in a happy trip when these cars were new. So you had spares, and you actually have one on the other side, and it was easily accessible. There's a bolt that goes in through here, goes into a bracket, you lift it up. There's actually a jack that you carry in here. This is where your tools, and your jack goes in there. Jack it up, and then there's a special hub wrench that you put on here. It says Rolls-Royce on it, and you take it off, put a spare tire on, put it back on, and it's actually easier than digging in the rear of most modern cars to change a tire. These cowl lights are a miniature of the headlights, and when the car was built, this was all part of the frame, the firewall, and they were fitted on here. So when you bought the bare chassis before you had the body built, you had headlights in the front and you had these cowl lights on the side. The windshield wiper, you kind of hope you don't use because it's pretty darn small. But that was the state of the art at the time. There's actually a motor back here powered by vacuum, and that was about all you got.